Welcome, friends. You are listening to Nurses Out Loud on America Out Loud Talk Radio. My name's Ashley Grogg, and I'm going to be your host today. I have a wonderful lineup of fellow nurses here today. I'm super excited. Nurse Michelle, Jody O'Malley, and Nurse Nicole are going to be joining, and we are going to hit a tough topic. So, this is going to be a really good show, but it's going to be kind of a hard show. We are really going to focus in on Alexis Lorenze. If you're not following her story, we're going to talk a lot about it tonight. I encourage you to get updated on that. And a nurse's duty to stand between the patient and the grave. That's heavy, really heavy topic. But we know that you are our friends out there. You need to hear this. This is tough love. We're going to bring it to you with love and compassion because that's what I believe in. But we're going to bring it, and we need you to take and do the next step and make sure that others hear about this. So make sure that you're telling your friends, your family about Nurses Out Loud, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, iHeartRadio, American Out Loud .news, and make sure that this information gets out. So as I said, I've got the nurses here with me. We're going to talk about Alexis Lorenze, and if you do not know her story, she's a beautiful, intelligent, articulate young woman, 23 years old. She has an autoimmune condition, PNH, paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, and it is an autoimmune condition that attacks red blood cells and platelets. She went into the hospital. She received a blood transfusion, and she was told the only way that they could treat her is if she got the meningitis vaccine. Now, the story has had a lot of twists and turns, and it's been really difficult from the perspective of a nurse to listen to it because it's not clear on what she actually got. Did she get just a meningitis vaccine like was ordered and what her doctor was saying? Did she get the quote tetanus vaccine, which actually has 3 antigens? Did she get a pneumococcal vaccine? We don't know, or a pneumonia vaccine. And so this is really tough as a nursing perspective of, first of all, why are these records not right? And then secondly, after she received these vaccines, within 10 minutes, she had a reaction. Started going blind in her eyes, arm heaviness, tingling, chest pain, and then she started developing the bruising. And if you've seen the pictures, it is absolutely horrendous. This poor woman went to social media, thank God that she did, where she finally got the help that she needed because she was being gaslit. She was being told that nothing was wrong, that this was her PNH. Within 10 minutes of a vaccine, any nurse should recognize and go to that. That is what changed in that short period of time. For this sudden onset to happen, it really makes you question. And that's why we're covering this topic today, because it is our duty to stand in the gap for these patients. So now that you have a little bit of poor Alexis's story, and in the show notes, you will find some of the interviews that were done by Polly Tommy, CHD, and Steve Kirsch did an excellent interview. So ladies, thank you for joining me this today for this recording. If I want you guys to go around and I want you to tell me, what would you have done if you were Alexis's bedside nurse before she got those vaccines? And if you want to elaborate a little bit more about what that was like and what you heard, that's great too. But what would you do?
Well, I guess I can go first. It's a hard one, right? I think for those of us, the nurses here on the show today, we're all awake. And I think we all had different times that we were awoken to the truth. And for me, it started in 2020. But even after I blew the whistle in 21, I knew that the COVID shot was something like suspect, right? It was total suspect. But it was hard for me to come out and use my registered nurse title behind my name. It was very scary because, the people, they respect nurses. And so the fact that I was alone in my thoughts and belief, essentially, or at least, outspoken about it, nobody else was in my hospital. And I took to Facebook and forget about it. I mean, I was just victimized or, villainized, and they hated me. So it was really, really hard for me to come out and talk about it. But I'm glad I did because, I mean, I was right, right? I saw a lot of injuries that were happening that were suspect. And now over the last 4 years, we do know that it's bioavailable. You can see injuries in the brain and the heart and the lungs, in, our sexual organs, it's everywhere, right? So, but even with the childhood vaccines, it took me some time, learning from, people like you, Ashley, you, Nurse Michelle, that I know that, have been speaking out against or for the injured. And so as a nurse in the ED, I'll tell you how I handle it now. I'm only giving people tetanus, okay? And where my practice has changed from then until now is, number one, we're so quick to say, oh, you need your tetanus shot? You got your tetanus shot within the last 5 years? Well, I know it's not just tetanus. They're getting the Tdap, right? Tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. So I make sure that people understand that. I also print out the vaccine information safety sheet because we're to document that in the chart. And I don't go in with the shot in the sheet and have them sign it and administer it. I drop off the sheet. I have them look it over, ask them if they have any questions. At that time, I answer it. But I don't impose my beliefs onto them. Now, if they ask me, and this is a point that I really want to make clear to all the nurses out there, we are not to impose our beliefs and our biasness onto people. But if people ask your opinion, if your patient asks your opinion, 100% you can give it to them, right? I mean, I wouldn't be like, oh, I wouldn't shoot if people are dying. Like, no, I'm not going to say that. But I would say something to the effect that they asked, would you think I needed tetanus? Would you take it? And I said, no, I wouldn't take it, but I've done research. So if you would like some more research, I can point you in direction of where you can get an opposing view. Because if you go and Google, big pharma runs the media, social media, the news, the NIH, the universities, the nursing schools, the medical schools. And then they're like, wait, what? So I do put that all in there. And then I send them, like the highwire.com. I'll send them to children'shealthdefense.org. I'll send them to sources like that. And then I'll let them decide. But it's really, it's not an easy thing. Because I don't have the time in the ER to sit and have a discussion with them. It's very fast. And, there could be a trauma coming in and I got to take care of that. So again, just to recap, I give them the safety sheet, give them some time alone with it, come back in the room, ask them if they have any questions. Most of the time they say nope. And then, they get the shot. And, but if they are even wondering, if they're even thinking like, I don't know, then I say, then don't do it today. You can always come back and get it.
So one of the things that I want to add to that is there's a difference between adding your own bias and doing informed consent. Allowing that patient to have a risk benefit analysis. We'd like to offer you this tetanus shot. It includes these other antigens, yada, yada, yada. Just want to let you know that this will not prevent tetanus, this injury. This is more protection for the future because you will not develop antibodies prior to tetanus setting in. So you just need to be aware that you're going to need to still watch that wound for signs and symptoms of tetanus, etc. And going on. And a lot of people don't realize that tetanus shot you're getting in the ER is not going to help you for this injury. It is not going to develop antibodies for quite some time. And so it's hard. It's hard. And then you face the pressures, like you said, of everybody else in there, nobody being, quote, awake or aware. How do you handle that? Nurse Nicole, do you want to weigh in on that?
I had been a cardiovascular, like a heart transplant nurse for about 6 years. So giving vaccines was really typical in that field because in order to be considered for a transplant, you have to be 100% vaccinated. And unfortunately, during the COVID time, the COVID-19 vaccine was put in the mix of those vaccines. However, some don't realize that there is actually an adult vaccine schedule, and there are X amount of vaccines that they expect you to have, even if you were vaccinated as a child. So a lot of time there's misinformation on that. The individual is not aware that there is a adult vaccine schedule. And so to echo off both of you, informed consent is really big, and being able to take the time to give them the correct information and let them exercise bodily autonomy to make that decision and understand, if we go this way, this is potentially what could happen. If we go this way, something else could potentially happen. And again, a lot of times, especially like in the emergency department, like Jody mentions, it's very like high energy, intense. There's a lot of, go, go, go. They are not given the time to be able to make those decisions because there's almost a level of fear that's being injected at that time because you're so worried that they're going to potentially get tetanus. And one of the things about Alexis that I think is really important to note is that at one point it was circulating that she received, the tetanus vaccine. And even then, majority of the individuals reporting and kind of going over that story did not understand that we do not just give tetanus. It's an actual Tdap, and that is a 3-in-1 vaccine. So, again, not understanding in general, what these vaccines consist of and how this looks when we're giving them to individuals and the risks involved. When most of the time, when you read these vaccine inserts, it will tell you that the immunocompromised population has really not been studied, and it'll say very clearly they don't know. So for us to go in and give what little information we have and make sure that we explain it in a way that they understand, like you said, the risk versus benefit, and ensuring that we follow the protocols, like Jody said, with giving the vaccine safety sheets and making sure we're documenting that we went over that, because unfortunately, most people may not know there's no liability to the vaccine manufacturers. So as the nurse who may be giving it, from a legal standpoint, there are times that you could be held responsible for that, and a lot of nurses don't realize that. So you're also being subjected to potentially falling for something that may happen, especially if you cannot prove that you provided all of the information, the safety sheet, etc.
The safety sheet is required to be given, and I think, Nurse Michelle, you have followed this case so closely with Alexis and just kind of the trauma of it all. Can you break down the steps that had happened to Alexis for her consent? I know you've watched a lot of those videos. And then what you would have done different? How would you have handled that?
As far as what I first observed in this situation was that the family was reporting to the people they were pleading and the Instagram audience and the social media audience was that they were feeling bullied. They were anti-vax family before they even came in the room. So the girl had not even had any vaccines since she was a child. So when I say a child, I mean like an infant, apparently. She did not continue through the schedule. And so her family did not want any vaccines. Her daddy was not there with her. She came in as a young adult, 23-year-old, and she was immediate, she has a situation that needs unique care. Any nurse who had a PNH patient presenting would have to go and look that up because she's not going to know what PNH is. That's just hands down. Unless you work in hematology, you do not know what that is. So you should be Googling what in the world does this person have. Sounds like she made it through the first stages of testing, and she even had a bone marrow aspiration. And for anybody out there listening, yes, it is as serious as it sounds. To have a bone marrow aspiration is no minor deal. And this person's condition was serious enough to require a bone marrow aspiration to get a formal diagnosis. And they concluded that what was needed was going to be some form of blood transfusion. And that's where the game starts changing for the patient. The patient is not going to be allowed to have access to that life-saving blood transfusion because a PNH crisis that she was having is life-threatening. So she needs to have the blood transfusion. And they're saying to her that she cannot proceed without a series of vaccinations, meningitis, pneumococcal, and tetanus is what the family was told. And for a while, everybody was saying she got 3 shots. And as we've all just covered, we know that there is no such thing as a tetanus shot. There once upon a time was a DT, a diphtheria tetanus. And for the most part, no families were being informed that they were additionally getting the diphtheria vaccine. But that production for the DT is gone. And that was in 2022. So now, because the production of the DT vaccine has disappeared off the market, now we only have adult DTP for her. So she got diphtheria and pertussis in addition, as we've already discussed. But the thing that's most interesting about this is what you've already said. She starts losing sight and loss of limb, arm and leg function. Something is wrong, Houston. It really doesn't take a rocket science intelligence to recognize we have a serious problem on our hands here. And it sounds like these medical community did not respond appropriately to something so shocking like that. And then these purple patches start appearing on her. And it probably isn't appropriate to even say bruising because the girl is laying in bed. She's not experiencing any trauma. And what I did when I heard this case was I wanted to show how very simple it is for a non-medical person to make more progress than this medical institution did do. Literally, all you had to do was Google purple rash on face. It really isn't complicated. And when you do that, you immediately come up with something called purpura. And purpura, interestingly enough, can show up. These purple rashes, there's 2 things that stand out most importantly. Purpura, which that's closely associated to a blood clotting disorder. Well, she's coming in with a blood clotting disorder, so let's pay attention to that point. And then the other very interesting thing is meningococcal meningitis. So it's associated to meningitis, and they just injected a meningitis vaccine into her. So that should be the first 2 things I would think a care plan would involve is let's go down this bunny trail. And without any effort hardly on my part at all, I was able to find out that acute intermittent purpura fulminans occurs during an acute illness, usually sepsis, with endotoxin producing gram-negative bacteria. So when I started going down the bunny trail of what is this purpura fulminans, I literally found everything this girl was reporting. It was within 2 minutes of a search, it was identifiable. And the father would later reach out to me. Apparently he got access to what I had done and said that I had nailed it, that I had gotten it right on that this is what she actually ended up getting diagnosed with. But the family was reporting that the medical professionals were gaslighting her and even laughing at her. So that as nurses out there, we all know we've worked with those kind of nurses. We know who they are. They are not the nurses that went into this career for the relief of the suffering because they were possibly empaths that wanted to touch the lives of other people and make a difference in the lives of people and be the change and be the person that could end suffering, whether it be ushering life into this world or ushering life out of this world. That is the only people we really want in this career, is people who genuinely want to help others. If you are not motivated to help others, you are in the wrong career. Go get in research or something for medical because you're contributing to the problem. I have to assume that y'all are the types that are laughing at patients. If you are mocking a person in this that comes in with such a rare disorder, she ends up with such a rare reaction happening to her. But you know what? When you look that up and you just push images under Google, lo and behold, you will find immediately hundreds of photos of people just like that matching purpura fulminans diagnosis. And you don't have a whole bunch of intelligence needed to say, hey, I think we need to go down the treatment path for this particular condition because I think we just did it to her.
Yeah, it's so scary. And I'm so glad you brought up the fact that not only was she being gaslit, not only was she being shunned and kind of pushed off to the side, but to have medical professionals laughing at you. And I 100% agree. If you are not here to love and care for that patient like it is your blood, get out. We don't want you.
Right.
Get out.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not a job. It's not a job. It's not a paycheck job. You're 100% right, Ashley.
Yeah, this is the thing that drives me nuts. And this is why I wanted to do this show, because you literally are standing between that patient and the grave, especially in a case like Alexis's. Nurse Nicole touched beautifully on the fact that this happens with transplant patients. We could go into this, could be a series, really. But talking about these patients, and this is where it just digs in underneath my skin. How much benefit? We need to do the risk benefit analysis. How much benefit are these patients getting from these vaccines? Well, I can tell you, if she needs a monoclonal antibody blood transfusion, that meningococcal vaccine is not going to work before that takes out her immune system.
Mhm.
If it's taking out her immune system, her body is not going to respond. So we just injected that, which is designed to create an immune response, into somebody in an acute exacerbation of an autoimmune condition, in serious condition.
Mhm.
Yeah, for all the people that are out there that just are lovers of the vaccines and think that they are the best thing that God ever sent down from heaven, and because we're not made perfectly enough that we needed all these injections to survive on this earth. For those that are out there that are so pro-vaccine, you've got to question yourself to say, do you even know what a vaccine does? The amount of work it's supposed to put on the body to amp it up to create an immunity. So if that's what you believe a vaccine is supposed to do, it's going to put the body to work to create immunity. Why would you put a body to work when it is in distress? Jody, who works in the emergency room, knows good and well that the last thing she's thinking about, or any of those doctors that are smart are thinking about, when a patient comes in with, limbs and arms gouged and blood coming from their body, we are not worried initially about whether or not it might have been a piece of metal that might have possibly had tetanus on it. We are worried about saving the life. And this girl, I really honestly believe that there's something to do with young, beautiful women. When they come into an ER, it doesn't matter what you come in and say is wrong with you. There's something about the population of the ER that does not read you appropriately. They can't see past maybe your youth and your vitality and the fact that maybe you were able to speak articulately about your own condition, but you're saying she was having like 2 weeks of severe migraines. And for people who don't know this, I'm a person that has a blood clotting disorder. So some of the presentation for some of my blood clotting disorder presentations is when teeny little blood clots travel through the brain and get stuck in capillary beds, you can have severe headaches in your brain. And the condition that I have, that's a heart condition that makes that happen, is directly associated to those blood clots traveling through a PFO, a patent foramen ovale, up to the head. And you will find out that people with PFOs have significant migraine history. So if you also have a blood disorder that's going to be making sticky blood travel through capillary beds, migraines have got to stop being looked at as a poo-poo thing. Oh, this poor girl, she's got migraines. Everybody gets migraines. FYI, they don't.
Well,
FYI, there's
the thing is this wasn't down in the ER. This was up on a floor with a hematologist, with a specialist. I think the problem right here, right now, is critical thinking. It is that failure to practice what we are supposed to in critical thinking, doing that risk benefit analysis and being the nurse. Your job is to ensure that patient care is done safely. And we're coming up hard against a break here in just a minute. The one thing I want to talk about before we go is the Nurse Practice Act. Your state has a Nurse Practice Act. You are obligated to be that advocate to make sure that treatment plan by the doctor is safe and to question it. And when you find that there are repeated incidents of maybe, how do I want to say this? Patterns, when you find that people aren't taking their patients seriously, nurses laughing in the hallway, you have a duty to report that, because their interest is not in that patient's well-being. And so I want to encourage you all to go look at your Nurse Practice Act. Go look what it says. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about what you can do. We're going to talk to Jody a little bit about whistleblower. We're going to talk more about this Nurse Practice Act, because we want to equip you with the tools. If you're experiencing a situation like this where you feel that you need to advocate for a patient, but you don't know how, we're going to help you with that. So stay with us here. We're going to come back from the break here in just a minute. Welcome back to Nurses Out Loud. We've got a bang up lineup here. We've got Nurse Jody, Nurse Michelle, Nurse Nicole, and we are talking about the nurse's duty to stand between the patient and the grave. And poor Alexis Lorenze, 23-year-old, beautiful young woman, has really had a big struggle with this. And we want to make sure that our nurses out there have the tools they need to stop this from happening. Alexis is not alone in this. There have been other patients. In the first half, you heard Nurse Nicole talk about how these vaccines are required for heart transplant patients. We know they're required across the board for transplant patients. So we're going to dig into this a little bit more, and we're going to talk about what to do when you find yourself in a situation where you're witnessing your peers treat patients poorly, laugh about these conditions. They have a bias. They absolutely have a bias. So, Jody, can you please tell us a little bit about whistleblowing and how to handle these kinds of situations?
Well, from what I gather from Alexis' story, and if this is not her story and it's just somewhat of a case study, I want everybody to just try to follow along here. Number one, here you have a person. Doesn't matter if they're young, they're old, they're in a crisis, a life or death situation, an autoimmune condition, really, on low, basic explanation of an autoimmune is essentially your body's attacking itself. Okay. So you're already fighting your body's immune system, right? Your body's, they're fighting each other. So she's not in the condition to accept anything, right? Like, if you have people that are wearing a mask, for Christ's sake, and they don't want to get sick because their body is already being taxed, you're talking about putting all these adjuvants and aluminum and all these other ingredients that's in a vaccine into a body that's already taxed. So if this is the case, and she is coming cross country to participate in a clinical trial, this is what I've heard of the story. When Britt Galvin reached out to me to collaborate with her on a post and share it, thank God she did. I mean, all Britt really had to say to me was, this is PTSD. This is exactly what happened to me. For me to say, okay, put my name on it. You know what I mean? Because there wasn't a lot of information at the time that was going around. But she's already traveled cross country to get this life-saving treatment. The time to say, oh, you need to take these shots is not the time to obtain informed consent. Okay. Because now if she is consenting, she is under duress. Okay. For a nurse to sign off on that, I can't see like any attorney being able to say, yeah, was she in the right state of mind? Or had she just traveled and this and that, right? So that right there is number one wrong. Number two, we really, like you said, Ashley, we need to critically think here. And is there any research? Was there any clinical trials for heart transplants, for, her blood disorder? No. They haven't done specific. What's the study of somebody in a crisis, right? And we're going to inject them with these injections. Well, there's no study, so we have no idea how doing that when their body is already taxed and they're in need of this, how that affects the outcome. So we don't know that. Okay. So we need to critically think here as nurses. But like you talk about the Nurse Practice Act, everybody needs to go to the 9 provisions of the Nursing Code of Ethics. This is what I am creating my course based on, the 9 provisions. And provision 3, the title says, the nurse promotes, advocates for, and protects the rights, health, and safety of the patient. Now, on another provision, it says a nurse's duty is to the patient. That is where our duty lies, is to the patient. And and in the exact terminology, I can pop it up here. It says in number 2, the nurse's primary commitment is to the patient, whether an individual, family, group, community, or population. Okay. Now, under the third one that I mentioned, number 3, 3.2 says protection of human participants in research. Guys, nurses, go through this, okay? Because we'll get to my whistleblowing real quick. If you want to know exactly what I expose, go to jodyomalleyrn.com and you can watch the 13-minute video that this time 3 years ago I exposed virally to the world. But at that time, when I'm having conversations, when I'm hearing that the pharmacy director and the nurses in the ICU and, the administrators are conspiring to report me to the board for being a patient advocate and being outspoken, I laugh. And I have that on video. One day people are going to see all the freaking videos that I took, guys. I mean, this is going to be a story, because when my boss told me, you just can't speak on that. You can't speak on anything other than what the provider ordered. And I was like, have you lost your mind? I said, I am a nurse. I have my own license. I can be held criminally charged on my own if I don't stand up against or stand for the ethical principles of my practice. And that's exactly what I did, and what I tell people all the time. If you stand on these provisions, okay, and you also stand on, the autonomy, what do they call it? The 7 principles, doing what's good and right, doing no harm, justice, accountability, accepting responsibility for your personal actions, autonomy, fidelity, being faithful to that person, the belief or cause, and veracity is the principle of truth telling. Okay. We are nurses, and people love us and respect us so much because we are truthful. And because, guys, here's the thing. We have more education than doctors do. We just do. They just have a different type of education. Okay. But the biggest thing that I think separates the doctor from speaking out versus the nurse speaking out is that the doctor makes $500,000 a year. The nurse makes 75. So it's a lot easier for us to walk away from a job and maybe get 1 or 2 jobs, right, in order to replace that income. That doctor, and many doctors, they are the provider for their whole family, right? And so I guess I hope that I answered your question, because I really don't want to waste time on my story. My story was essentially me speaking out and advocating and telling everyone else around me that bring it, because I am standing on the ethics of my profession. And guess what happened? When my story was released virally to the world, I think it was 18 complaints I had against my license, saying that I was an anti-vaxxer, that I was creating distrust and misinformation, malinformation, disinformation, all of these things. I had to undergo a formal ethics evaluation. And what got me out and had my name cleared was ethics. Ethics.
I think that's the key to stand on right there. The fact that obviously we're not telling you to be an anti-vaxxer. When you go into that hospital, your job is not to have that bias, like Jody said earlier. Your job is to present the facts, to advocate for that patient in accordance with their wishes, making sure that they're understanding the situation best at hand. And I think that one of the frustrations in watching all of this is seeing how these patients were coerced, or how Alexis was coerced, and how we know that this is happening across the board. And so, Nurse Nicole, I'm going to go back to you, and I want to talk to you about this because you have real world experience seeing this with your transplant patients. How can we stand on ethics? How can we give those patients and then mustering up the courage. And then we'll go over to Nurse Michelle and talk about this a little bit more in respects of, making those reports, getting that documentation, educating yourself. But Nurse Nicole, fill us in. Tell us, what do you see in the hospital, and what small changes could nurses make to stand up for those patients and stand in ethics?
I think it's a really good topic because, again, this is something that we face day in and day out. And one of the biggest things that the nurses need to remember is you are the patient advocate and you are the patient's educator. Again, coming in with unbiased information to present only the facts. One of the things that we are responsible for in their most vulnerable state, which is what really upsets me when it comes to Alexis's story, because she was alone. She had no advocate. She does not know the medical system. That was our duty as healthcare workers to come in and be able to protect her, to be able to make sure that we are notifying her and standing on the principles of what type of interventions we're going to be doing or having the conversation. She is a very rare blood disorder that, like Michelle mentioned earlier, a lot of people are not going to know how to manage this. You have individuals that are going to come to her and tell her she's going to need things like these vaccines, like blood transfusions. For anyone that's not in the healthcare field, you need to know that giving a unit of blood is a big deal, especially in immunocompromised patients. When we had our heart transplant patients and you're giving them blood, you need to make sure you not only do you have the right blood type, but you need to make sure that they don't have any antibodies, that they don't have any antigens in them. And with each thing you do to an individual by giving them blood and or giving them vaccines or certain things that could induce a response, an immune response, you now raise the risk of potentially having more adverse outcomes because their body is essentially in an inflammatory state and really kind of struggling. So for me, it was really standing on the fact that we have a duty to protect and a duty to notify these patients on what is going on with their care, what could potentially happen. And when individuals were just following the science and just kind of going along with the narrative, being someone that had been a nurse a really long time on the particular unit that I was working on, having a lot of newer nurses that just didn't know any better and were scared and were being fed information and essentially being told, you're not allowed to critically think because this is the protocol, this is the policy, whatever you want to call it. I had to remind them that you ultimately have to speak for yourself, your license. You have to be able to back what you're saying to these individuals. Your duty is to the patient, not to the hospital, not to the organization, because at the end of the day, they will bury you. As a legal nurse consultant, I have seen these cases. It is really unfortunate the depths that they will go. And nurses or anyone that's hearing this, you want these compassionate individuals to empathetically sit down with you and try to spend time with you to understand what's going on. A lot of times we are met with really unrealistic expectations. You now have a lot of people that aren't really compassionate, aren't really empathetic. They're just going along with the flow. And that can be very dangerous. You should expect nothing less than being able to have someone speak to protecting you, being your advocate, and making sure that you understand informed consent. When it came to nurses that were just going along with the flow, unfortunately, that's why I ended up leaving as a cardiac transplant nurse, because patients were pigeonholed. They were given these COVID-19 vaccines. We didn't have a lot of things to go on related to informed consent. They had very poor outcomes. A lot of them were coming back in and out of the hospital. Nobody could figure out what was wrong with them, although we know. And they ended up having a higher mortality. A lot of nurses started to see this and they were absolutely terrified because at that time we were giving those injections in the hospital. I was fortunate to never do it. I was able to kind of get out of it and just give the informed consent, let them think about it, and then go about my business. However, again, as long as the patient understands what the risk versus benefit is, it has nothing to do with what I want to do or not. But unfortunately, there was such a toxic culture that nurses were terrified. We weren't allowed to report to VAERS. You weren't allowed to do this. Doctors were, basically bullying and giving you, coercion tactics to follow along. So now that we're 4 years into this, and those that are listening, you just have to remember that right now we have tons of lawsuits going on. And what they are standing on within the statute of limitations are those individuals who just followed the science and the narrative and did what they were told because they did not give informed consent, and or it was a doctor's order and they just gave it because that's what they were told to do. And the patients that made it are able to speak to that. Documentation lacked, and there were many people that can be brought in to testify to say that this happened. So we want to make sure that everyone understands that it's a non-negotiable. When you come to us in the hospital, it is your duty to protect these human beings and to be their advocate. You are held to a standard. You have to know what your Nurse Practice Act is. You need to know what your code of ethics are, because without that, you are held to that standard when things fall through. So, Michelle, I know, can elaborate a little bit better on, that additional process, but it's still happening today. A lot of it's due to lack of understanding and lack of time, but it's not an excuse, because at the end of the day, you are 100% liable. And I promise you, these hospitals are coming for those nurses, not those doctors.
Yeah, one of the things I absolutely love about Michelle is she's tenacious. She
Absolutely.
will go dig that information up, and she will have 20 sources for you, and she'll be able to break them all down. And so, um, so much of what you said, Nicole, is just, it's the essence of nursing, and we're forgetting, and it's really heartbreaking. It's good to know that these things are being brought into the light of day. And how is that happening? Because people are reporting. I think, speaking, Michelle, maybe you want to take this over, talking about making those reports. Attorney General, like, go ahead and you take it over from here.
Well, I definitely want to make sure the medical professionals that are listening in the audience who use the term anti-vaxxer and how you use it to harm your patient by using this term in what you think is a disparaging way. Those that are actually the anti-vaxxers got that way. I want you to understand one of 5 ways. They either had an injured, handicapped, or deceased loved one or themselves from a vaccine, which of course means that they were pro-vax before they actually got the injury. So you are already showing your ignorance by saying that they are an anti-vaxxer. You don't get to be an anti-vaxxer any other way other than these 5 ways. So the first one is you've got an injured, permanently handicapped, or dead loved one. You are lucky enough to know somebody who had that happen to them, and that burned you, and you read the data and you found out for yourself. Or you're actually a medical professional who actually reads. And when I say that you actually read, that we already know that you did not learn this in nursing school, because guess what? We're all nurses too. And we know the doctors didn't do it either. And the doctors that are telling us the truth have told us that they did not learn it either. So it's time for you to take personal responsibility to prove to yourself what you have not learned and get your information and start knowing what the ingredients are and learn how to identify and report a vaccine adverse reaction. Because guess what? This is a pharmaceutical product with additives and adjuvants, which means any adverse reaction that can happen with any other pharma product can happen with a vaccine. So it's not like there's these special little vaccine related adverse reactions. Anything that can happen with a pharma product can happen with a vaccine. So get yourself informed and discover what you don't know. And once you learn, do better, and never use the term again to a patient, because you should be ashamed of yourself for ever saying such a thing. You actually show your own ignorance. So that's the first thing. And yes, you should be taking classes with Ashley Grogg and learn how to actually report a VAERS vaccine report, because you are a mandatory reporter. I know that may be new to some of you, but now you know. So you have an obligation to do the right thing, get yourself informed, and learn how to report a vaccine injury, because your patients are counting on you. Because guess what? They're going to have to go to vaccine court. Yes, that's a real thing. And they can't go to the court system in your local community, because your government has protected those pharmaceutical companies from ever being able to be sued. So they are depending on you to write accurate, detailed notes of everything you observed. You better be writing down that you just gave them a vaccine, and you better be writing everything that you noticed after that fact. And you better make logical deductions, because the professionals in that courtroom are going to be counting on you to have written a very good statement on behalf of the patient. You're protecting your patient and continuing in your advocacy by documenting well. And for those out there who are, doing intake and doing triage, you better make sure that you're asking the question, did you get the COVID-19 vaccine or did you get any vaccine in the last week? Because whatever they got, you better make sure your notes have it included. And Jody, I'm sure you see more of that as well in the ER. A lot of people getting asked questions and sometimes not the right questions.
Yeah, I would like to talk more about nursing ethics. I do just want to touch on, I briefly mentioned the Attorney General, and in our Nurse Practice Act, we as nurses have the duty to report unethical behavior to our Attorney General, and it goes over all of the details of what you're supposed to file with them. So they also talk about the Consumer Protection Division, and they also talk about reporting to your employer or contracting agency. So what would this look like? And one of the things is we are pushed and pushed to make reports. I used to have to write up risk management reports. There were 3 different kinds of reports that we would have to make on these situations, whether it be a sentinel event or something else, that we have to take and make a special report on. And I think this would be one of those situations, talking about corporate compliance. Those are supposed to be, I'm so sorry. What's the word? Confidential. Those corporate compliance reports are supposed to be confidential. You are supposed to be able to report ethical issues that you see in the workplace. And when you see these nurses out there laughing and criticizing a patient for their beliefs, their concerns, and concerns over their care, that is an ethical issue. And if we would stand up the same way that those nurses or doctors or whoever were attempting to report Jody O'Malley, or actually reporting her, if we did the same thing in return, standing on those principles of ethics, how would our profession change? So the next time you're in that situation, I want you to ask yourself that. How can I make change? And I understand you are concerned about your job, and you should be. Do you want to do that job to the best of your ability, to take care of those patients, to love those patients, and hopefully to protect those patients from those bad nurses? Are you going to be satisfied walking out those doors without doing that? What kind of moral injury are you going to suffer when you realize that your inaction and your silence was compliance? You have a responsibility. It's not optional. Go make those reports. So now that I'm preaching and getting excited, I'm going to turn it over to Jody before I get too wild here. But Jody, talk to us more about those ethics. Enlighten us a little bit more, because you have so much experience on this.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here. I know all 4 of us are, it's just everything to keep our mouth closed while one of us is talking, because we have so much to add. So just very briefly, what Ashley was talking about, reporting. You have to create a paper trail. Paper trails are huge. I-STAR report, right? You could do this anonymously. If you ever get to a court situation and you ask, hey, listen, I did file an I-STAR report. I did do it anonymously, even pull up this date. And then they did, and they find that report and what you said, they know it's yours, right? So file those I-STAR reports. Another thing is that we do have the authority, the accountability, the responsibility for our nursing judgments, decisions, and actions. Okay. This is number 4 in the code of ethics. You saying I just was following doctor's orders, or if Anthony Fauci just said I should take it, I'm following the science, quote unquote, that is not going to be enough to get you out of this situation, because all an attorney has to do is say, well, did you ever see anybody write anything on Facebook, or any of your other colleagues talk about, say, ivermectin, if you will? And if you say yes, that you heard of that, it is your duty as a nurse to do some research on that. It is something called continuing education, and it is our professional responsibility to do that. That's under number 5 of the nursing code of ethics, is that we have a professional duty to continue to strive for professional growth. Okay. So you have to know that and be aware of that. And then also too, integrity, guys. I mean, geez, what are you doing when no one else is looking? What are you doing? And if you're able to, like, go home and look in the mirror and look at your kids or your husband or your wife and sleep at night. No wonder why we're all like anxious and depressed and having panic attacks. Those types of things resonate in your subconscious, that resonates in your soul, and you are struggling with it eternally. Nurse Ashley, she talks a lot about moral injury. She even has a course. You know, I suggest you checking that out, because this isn't something that you just shake. This is something that is going to get worse and worse and worse. And you know, God bless you all. You know, it's a big fight. I didn't even realize how much of a fight it was until I was in the discovery process, and not discovery, until I was in trial with HHS. And I found out through the discovery process that the chief medical officer and the chief nursing officer in June of 2020, okay? Because I was speaking out immediately, removing the advocate, putting on masks, stopping, you know, non-essential surgeries, all these things. And I found out through an email exchange between them and my supervisor that they looked me up on Facebook and were trying to get me for HIPAA because of how much I was speaking out. But I was just speaking out on, you know, what was actually happening. And I removed my affiliation with the hospital. So remove your affiliation with where you work. Nobody needs to know that. And just start having conversations. You know, here in the next, you know, what, 6 weeks or so, we are going to be voting. And it's not just for president. We are going to be voting for medical freedom. Okay. If they take that away from us, like this last administration did, and trust me, I have my own issues with Trump and how he handled it and pushed it out, but he was not pushing for us to be coerced into taking an experiment or having our job. So I really highly encourage you guys. Now is not the time to keep your mouth shut. Now is the time to go gather the lions, okay, or the sheep, and bring them to vote. Okay. We
Yes.
need you. We need people to vote.
Yes, we do. I'm going to put a call out. We are up against a hard stop here. Our time is out. Thank you all for coming and being with us. Thank you so much to my lovely nurse co-host. I love you all so much. Please, please, if you are the praying type, pray for Alexis. Pray for her family. Pray fervently for her healing, and for Nurse Angela as she advocates, and all the people involved in this care, that they might come to realize and understand their role in this and their ethical responsibility to care for this beautiful young woman and prevent things like this from happening again. That includes all of us in the profession. You can hear Nurses Out Loud 10 a.m. Eastern Time every weekday, encore at 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Anywhere you can listen to your favorite podcast. We appreciate you coming through with us on these tough topics. If you have questions, submit them directly to us, and have a wonderful day.